accretive to the corporate's valuation. So this mentality is something that significantly needs to shift, and I think governments can play a role in encouraging this. This could be everything from tax breaks to economic zones and various other facilitations. Similarly, I think in the region, collaboration should occur similarly. When companies want to enter a different market, instead of just trying to get greenfielded into the ground, go to one of the local leaders and say, hey, listen, can we work with you? Maybe we'll actually invest in you, instead of just trying to compete with you and kind of unsettle all the work that you've done. Again, this is a win-win scenario for both sides, because the valuations go up on both for the local company as well as the investor. And I think what's really important for us, and especially as a venture firm, but also working with founders and looking at Bangladesh, which is a country where our wealth per capita still needs to see a significant bump, is it creates the local wealth. We're no longer working for others but ourselves.
That's a really important point about creating local wealth and partnering with local companies. This is something that MasterCard has really found very useful. We talk a lot about public-private partnerships, but we are actually more doubling down on private-private partnerships, and that's working, whether it's NGOs or working with local entrepreneurs, because they know the market better than we do sometimes. So I'd like to actually pose a similar question to Dia about that. As Facebook, what more can the private sector do to work, big companies like us work with the government, but also work with startups in Bangladesh?
Thanks, Sarah. That's a really important question in terms of sort of how do we think about our collective future. And I think it goes back to the point that a few made a while ago around having this entrepreneur-first mindset, right? So how do you really enable the ecosystem? How do you do what's right for that ecosystem? So for Facebook, we have been working really closely with the government, as you mentioned, for quite a while, training entrepreneurs, building their capacity, supporting in some of the cross-border learnings and knowledge sharing that Rahul had previously alluded to. But beyond that, I think that model around private-private partnership is also becoming incredibly important, particularly when we bring different strengths to the market as large companies, but also how do we enable companies like Shiko and ShopUp to then reach out to the much more sort of brick and mortar, grassroots level sort of ecosystem. I mean, I think that's a really important point. The other thing I think it's particularly important is to think about it in terms of sort of, how are we thinking about conversational commerce, as we say at Facebook, or just personalized experience, right? And I think, again, that's where private-private partnerships are really important, because I may not be directly connecting with a brick and mortar store as a company. I know they're using our services, but what do they precisely need? How can we ensure that they're having the right capacity, right tools, right assets? And again, I think working with companies like ShopUp or similarly sort of commerce-based companies is going to be particularly critical in order to not just sort of grow our wealth as a country, but also be able to solve the problems for the people who are enabling these businesses, who are starting these businesses, and making sure that products at Facebook or programs at Facebook, for example, are actually responding to that need. And the way we think about conversational commerce or social commerce today is largely a responsive thing, because we've seen that when people are able to personalize that buy and selling experience, when you're able to talk to your consumer, when it's not just top down, but actually like a journey where you're saying, this is what I need. And it's almost similar to how you would go to a physical store, look at a product, have a conversation, and then end up making a choice. I think bringing that experience online is going to be particularly exciting. And on a final note, I think I want to touch on a little bit about sort of the future. And you spoke a little bit about AR, VR previously. And at Facebook, we're also beginning to see a lot of opportunity there. So, we're investing heavily in the metaverse. And a big sort of use case around that is going to be commerce. How do people experience that experience? How do people experience online purchase, e-commerce, consumer sort of journeys, more transparency, perhaps, when they're in this space, which is making them as close as to a physical space as possible. And I think we're really excited about creating that future together with Bangladesh entrepreneurs, because I completely agree with all of the panelists here that the future of Bangladesh is very exciting, and we see it at Facebook, and we think there's a lot of opportunity, particularly for the next decade, when Bangladesh today is now ready, but going into this new sort of zone where it's more about growth and growing the middle class and creating wealth. And I think we're very excited to be a part of that journey.
Dia, you mentioned the metaverse, and that makes me nervous, but excited at the same time. But anyway, so I want to actually ask all of you a question about, we're talking about sort of an enabling environment in Bangladesh. And, when I think about that, I also think about trade, because this is what I live and die for. But, open question to all of you, U.S. Bangladesh trade could be growing much faster and maybe even, creating more incentives for companies on both sides. What would be your sort of recommendations to both governments of how we can create this enabling environment, create incentives for companies on both sides to be investing both ways? So maybe I'll go back to Dia and we'll go around.
It's a really great question. I think one of the reasons of the many reasons we're very excited to be part of the U.S. Bangladesh Business Council is really to think about how do we, as an industry, think about sort of not only increasing the trade and business relationships between the U.S. and Bangladesh, but how do we really enable a larger conversation and environment for more trade to happen. And particularly when it comes to digital trade, I think there is a huge amount of opportunity. I think it's really difficult for any country in the world to say that, to kind of be cornered into a box, because we're all connected at this point. And the internet really has done that in a very explosive way. So to the extent we are creating policies that are allowing this cross-border information sharing, data sharing, trade sharing, remittance, payments corridors, I think all of these are particularly important to truly reap the benefits of the global economy. So an entrepreneur sitting in Bangladesh should be able to easily share information and perhaps even go into cross-border remittance sitting in Indonesia. And I think sort of creating those opportunities, that environment where there are policies, legislations that are not restrictive, but rather open, and sort of generating a lot of benefits from this cross-border information and knowledge sharing is going to be particularly important moving forward.
Afif, I'll turn to you. Same question.
Like very important question. So I'll focus my answer more towards fostering investments, since we basically have more experience when it comes to that. So I had a small conversation with this celebrated VC from Sequoia Capital called Doug Leone. So a group of founders, we basically had a session with him. So one of the founders from another new emerging country asked him, like, what should we do in a new country so that we can actually attract more investment? So he gave a very simple, straightforward answer that I still remember. So his answer was, just build great companies. Everything else will follow. So I think we follow that a lot. That I think the only way to attract more and more investment, not just from US but also throughout the world, is that building amazing companies which has the potential to grow very very large by solving real pain points in the market. I think if that's done, I think everything else
dollars in Bangladesh. That's absurd, right? For anybody looking to create value for their companies, the talent is in Bangladesh. But more importantly, if you want to actually fund a company in Bangladesh, that company could be worth way, way more. And that's something I think we should all think about over time. And for the country, that also needs to be a large part of its strategy, because to go from 2,000 to 5,000 to 10,000 GDP per capita, we do need to tap into global liquidity, soft skills, all these other things that historically we've somewhat neglected. So I'm very excited about that potential, and I think as we continue telling that story, it will resonate a lot more with Western investors.
Thanks, Rahat. Shahir, I'd like to close with you.
I mean, I'll just echo all the points that have already been made, but sort of add on to Rahat's point about the talent in terms of what we have here today across engineering, but also more and more as we sort of evolve other sort of functionalities and disciplines too, and that's a credit to companies like ShopHub and Afif, who've really led the way and paved the way in developing a startup ecosystem which has a lot of talent that is sort of ready to take this to the next level, to build for Bangladesh, but also to build in Bangladesh for abroad. So I think that's a key point. The other point, I guess, is as we sort of, Afif mentioned this, we're sort of the last frontier in terms of digitization. But when we look at even the numbers from a venture capital point of view when we talk about investments, right? So Bangladesh today, 90 cents per GDP per capita is the investment. When we look at India and Indonesia, that's over $30, right? So that stark difference is, I think, Bangladesh today is sort of 90 cents per GDP per capita. That's a